press the Israelis on what it is they're going to do, how they're going to do it, what are the considerations and implications that they see going forward, and how to extricate them. How do they plan to extricate themselves? The president has said publicly, reoccupation of Gaza would be a mistake. So that conversation, I think, is absolutely fundamental. And if he can help the Israelis think some of this through, I think that'll be a huge contribution, and may even affect their decision making. And finally, he must, both in Jerusalem talking to the Israelis and in Amman talking to Sisi, he must press and get an agreement.
I can now welcome Aaron David Miller, who has served 6 U.S. Secretaries of State as a specialist on Arab-Israeli negotiations. Aaron, welcome.
Pleasure to be here.
Good to have you here. I'm keen to get your view, first of all, on the cryptic comment from the Israeli military this morning that it may not be a ground invasion, which is on the cards, that something different may be done. I'm not clear at all, obviously, what that might mean. We've had one of our very well-informed analysts on who thought we may be looking at surgical strikes over a longer period. What do you think something different could turn out to be?
I think the Israelis, frankly, for any number of reasons, are delaying. I think they're delaying because of their own indecision and the complexity of what they know lies ahead. I think they're delaying because they want to give more time for Palestinians to leave Gaza City, which is going to be their main area of operation. I think they're delaying because of the weather, which is often an underestimated factor in terms of military operations there. And now they are delaying clearly because of the visit of the president. For all of these reasons, I think, what people assumed would happen quickly and comprehensively is not. I failed to mention hostages as a consideration. I think I don't speculate about that for any number of reasons. I think there's a degree of opacity on the hostage situation that makes this particular crisis idiosyncratic in terms of how that factors into it.
Yes.
So, and there are any number of, I suppose, escalatory steps that they could take. Look, they blockaded Gaza. They've had punishing airstrikes. And to some degree, the international legitimacy that they possessed in the aftermath of what could only be described as a brutal, savage terror rampage drawn out of the playbook of ISIS and Al-Qaeda, that is going to slowly or even quickly erode. So, I'm taking a gamble here, but it seems to me this is week 2. I think we'll go into week 3, which would be this coming Saturday, probably without what people anticipated which would have been a massive infantry assault with APCs and Merkava tanks, preceded by punishing airstrikes and commando operations in Gaza City.
Yes,
I think that's on hold.
So your educated guess is that a huge ground invasion is still on the cards, but maybe a delayed one. Do you imagine President Biden, would have expended valuable political capital trying to delay the invasion? Would he have tried to persuade them not to invade, or would that just be too much to take on?
Delay without a purpose makes everyone look uncertain, frankly, and indecisive. I think the Biden trip, which I support, is designed to achieve three goals, and I think they are achievable. I think the third one is the toughest. Number one, I think Biden senses, and remember who we're talking about here. We're talking about Joe Biden, whose love, literally, I use that word with great precision. The presidential model here is Bill Clinton. For both of these men, even a generation apart, their love of Israel, love of the idea of Israel, and their regard and sensitivity to Israeli security interests are deeply imprinted on their political and emotional DNA. I think Biden senses that the Israeli public needs additional reassurance and some measure of hope. I think he intuits that The reaction to his October 10th speech in Israel was quite extraordinary. And I think Israelis were quite disappointed, to say the least, with their own leadership, the majority of Israelis, based on the judicial overhaul, which is now dead, and I think permanently dead, as maybe Mr. Netanyahu's political future. But I think he thinks that his presence there it will be extremely important at this time. And you'll watch the frame that he creates in Israel.
Yes.
Number two, that frame of binding the U.S. to Israel is part, I think, of a strategy designed to gain as much confidence and trust as currency, which is to be used and deployed when the time comes, and the time may be now, for the sort of tough conversations that only a president can have with an Israeli prime minister, plus one. If I were Benny Gantz, member of the War Cabinet brought in from one of the opposition parties, I would insist on being present at that meeting with Prime Minister Netanyahu, because you do not want the prime minister in total control of this is what the president told me. And it'll be a four eyes conversation, hopefully six eyes. But that conversation, which is designed, I think, to help, at least I hope that's the intention.
Right. So
press the Israelis on what it is they're going to do, how they're going to do it, what are the considerations and implications that they see going forward, and how to extricate them. How do they plan to extricate themselves? The president has said publicly, reoccupation of Gaza would be a mistake. So that conversation, I think, is absolutely fundamental. And if he can help the Israelis think some of this through, I think that'll be a huge contribution, and may even affect their decision making. And finally, he must, both in Jerusalem talking to the Israelis and in Amman talking to Sisi, he must press and get an agreement that there will be a stable, predictable, reliable entry point and exit point through Rafah, surge humanitarian assistance to what is already an overly crowded, under-resourced and serviced concentration of humans. If he can do that and leave Israel without concern that the Israelis will launch an imminent ground operation as he departs, I think this will be a very successful trip in a very fraught situation. There's very little precedent for a president, and I've watched in a half a dozen administrations, Republicans and Democrats, enter this sort of situation with this fraught of a mission.
Right. Okay. So then, build up maximum credit with the Israeli leadership during the course of this visit. Use that credit to argue for maybe the opening of humanitarian corridor into Egypt at the Rafah corridor, and then argue for some restraint in the fighting which is to come. And beyond that, tell me what you think about the end game may look like with the urging of President Biden. What would replace Hamas when and if Hamas is torn down as the new authority in Gaza?
Yeah, I mean, look, I could paint you a scenario which is probably better suited to a galaxy far, far away right now than it is on planet Earth. But, and again, the assumption is based on the fact that the Israelis actually succeed in what it is they intend to do. And that's an elemental question. Is it part of the traditional wash, rinse, and repeat cycle where they badly damage Hamas's military capacity, erode its capacity to manufacture high trajectory weapons and rockets, disrupt its command and control, kill its leadership? Or is this an effort to fundamentally change Hamas's sovereignty and governance capacity in Gaza? That question, I think, is elemental to the day after question. But let's just assume, for the sake of argument, that the Hamas problem is resolved. I mean, there are any number of sorts of scenarios where security is maintained. I mean, how would security be maintained during this transition period? That's an elemental question. And who would provide basic services during this period of transition, where the
Yes.
UN would come in with a sort of transitional mechanism. Palestinian Authority would be re-engaged, dysfunctional and divided as it is, to reassume political control of Gaza, right? The Israelis and the Egyptians would buy into this because you're going to need entrance and exits from Gaza with predictability and stability to rebuild the place. The Saudis would contribute Gulf money and the Gulf states. The international community, led by a willful and skillful United States, harnessing the complementary powers of the EU, all of this would be kicked off in some sort of symbolic event to offer a new path and some new hope. And Gaza would be transformed from the open air prison that it's been, maybe not to Singapore on the Mediterranean, but to something better, something that would secure prosperity and safety for 2.3 million people, half of whom are under the age of 15. You know, that scenario, I could now destroy that scenario with my own analysis. But that gives you some sense of what sort of transition would be required.
Yes.
You know, in 2009, the Sri Lankan army crushed the Liberation Tigers of Tamil Eelam, right? A separatist group. They had 10 to 15,000 members. And in the process, they killed up to 40,000 civilians. In the 90s, the Peruvian government defeated Shining Path, you know, this Maoist revolutionary terrorist group, using indiscriminate military force. But Peruvian democracy suffered a big blow. Are we talking about an effort to crush Hamas, integrated into the social, economic, religious fabric of Gaza now since the late 80s?
Okay, Aaron.
Or something else. And neither you nor I, nor Pythia, the oracle at Delphi, reading the best of goat entrails and coffee grinds, can predict that.
No. Aaron, we can't do that. I realize we are speculating here, but it is informed and powerful speculation. Some of the most powerful speculation on these questions that I've heard. Aaron David Miller, thank you for joining us on Drive this afternoon.